of that little video. I actually believe that that's what people want. I actually believe that that's what people desire, to be able to come to a place and just be welcomed and accepted for who they are as well as where they are, regardless of being imperfect, regardless of mistakes. That they can go to somewhere where they feel not only loved but known. And I do want to take a quick interjection. Annie told me that a former pastor here, prior to Tim Holman, was Tim Craver, and his son just had a liver transplant and is now in the Cincinnati hospital.
He had that a few years ago, but he's back in the hospital now, so John can give you more details right now.
John, do you want to share?
Low blood count, I guess.
Low blood count.
Here in Virginia now, but he's going back to the Cincinnati hospital where he had a transplant a number of years ago.
Okay, they're in Virginia, but they brought him back to Cincinnati because of these complications. And Annie, one more time, the young man's name? Daniel Craver. Please keep Daniel Craver in your prayers. We're in this last week of our series, The Great News. And we said some things through each and every one of these messages, and we're not going to stop that today. We're going to actually try to hammer it home today. And we've been saying for 7 other weeks, this is the 8th week, that the gospel is what? The good news. Thank you. And we also said that what Jesus did for us is good news. And what Jesus is still doing for us is good news. And this good news we've already talked about should not be just good news that is to us. It's not just good news that is for us. It should be good news that goes through us and that creates this chain reaction that we should be a part of. And because when the gospel is working properly in our lives, it shouldn't stop with us. And so how are we going to get this done? How are we going to sit through 8 weeks of this series? 8 weeks of me hammering these points. How are we going to get this done and put this into effect in our lives? And so first, we're going to start by recognizing and officially declaring that this good news isn't just for us, it's good news for everyone. It's good news for the prostitute. It's good news for the person addicted to drugs. It's good news for your elders. Because I got to tell you, God doesn't see much difference between the lot of us. And this is good news truly for all of us. And second, we're going to have this one final conversation. And today we're going to talk about Pharisees. And I know that we've thrown these words out and we'll talk about them in Bible studies, we'll talk about them in sermons, but do you really know what a Pharisee is? And so I brought up the definition. And the definition of a Pharisee is a member of an ancient Jewish sect distinguished by strict observance of the tradition and the written law. And so these were people that knew everything and took great pride in that. And let me say first that it is good to know about God. It is good to know what God says. And it's even better to do it. To do what He says. We should know and have continual growth of knowledge in these things that God tells us and actually commands us to do. But that definition goes a little bit further. It adds, these Pharisees, and commonly held to have pretensions to superior sanctity. So if you were around a Pharisee, you might have not initially felt that you were inferior, but they would do their darndest to make sure that you knew how inferior you were. And the spiritual person who thinks that they're better than you, and they're not only thinking that, they're going to make sure they tell everybody about that. And it continues. There's one other part of this definition. A self-righteous person, a hypocrite. And so my prayer quite often for all of us, for every single one of us, is that we would truly be and remain in a state that makes us recovering Pharisees. And that's really the title of today's message, is Recovering Pharisees. And if you haven't gone through this phase, God bless you. If you haven't gone through this phase, don't, because you really don't have to. None of us are that impressive that we should feel like Pharisees. But if you are in recovery, stay in recovery. Don't fall off the wagon, because it's hard to jump back on. And if you are a Pharisee and you don't see anything wrong with that, just know that Jesus himself judged the Pharisee more so, worse than any of the other sinners. And I know for many of us, this series has helped us to maybe identify a little bit of the judgment that we didn't realize we had. And that it brought these things to the forefront, and that we realize that when we bring our judgment to people, which is really our strong opinions, we don't bring them closer to God. We actually push them farther and farther away. And so let's have this final conversation, and at the end of the day, we're going to take 2 practical steps. I'm going to give you the opportunity to take 2 practical steps. And our last conversation today is going to start out, and we're going to discuss 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Now, can anyone tell me, in one word, what best sums up 1 Corinthians chapter 13? That's a good response. Love. And we have our slide, love. Now, this is very interesting, because I wanted to talk about, and I was debating on, as soon as that came up, there was something significant that happened, and I just heard it from my wife, and it just made this thing that God gave me just true. And I was thinking that as soon as I put that slide up, a high percentage of the ladies in here would think, "Oh." But an equally high percentage of the men would be like, "Ugh." Go back to that Jewish culture, oy vey, right? But I want to jump into the initial few verses that Paul talks about in this kind of love, and what this kind of love really is. Because I think that there may be some misconceptions about what Paul is saying here. So let's read what Paul says. If I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but I do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and all of the knowledge, and if I have the faith that can literally move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all I possess to the poor, and I even give over my own body to the hardship that I may boast about, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. And so what Paul is saying here is that even if we have these gifts of tongues and prophecies, if we have this kind of faith that moves mountain, and we give away our possessions and we put our body into that, but we do not have love, all of that amounts to nothing. And this kind of love is not effeminate. It is not namby-pamby. It is not that Valentine's Day kind of love. And 1 Corinthians 13 is like this monastic creed. It's a code of chivalry. It's like taking an oath to the king and the kingdom that you love more than anything. And so these are not just words, but a guide to all of our lives, and more so, it is a call to action. And so, but when we talk about this love, and we say it's not mamby-pamby, what kind of love does this look like then? What kind of love? And I'm going to tell you that there are things that this love is. There are things that this love is. This love is patient and kind. What is patient? What does patient love really look like, and do we fit the bill? Patient love, it lets people struggle through their journey and doesn't demand immediate change. And we forget all too often God's patient with us. Does anyone else struggle with being patient with other people? Anybody? 2 hands? Make this one real, okay? And as much as we struggle, we'll struggle with ourselves, patient with ourselves, but we have even less patience with other people. And we forget all too often the incredible patience that God has had with every single one of us. It takes us days, it takes us weeks and years to figure some stuff out. It takes us a long time to figure out some of these things that God writes down in black and white, and we can't figure it out. And when we finally figure it out, we finally have that epiphany. We finally actually read and listen. We are then immediately offended at everyone else who doesn't have that figured out. Even though we just figured it out ourselves. We now expect, since I've got it, everyone should have it. That doesn't sound like patient love. But the second part of that is, love is kind. And what is kind love? When a person lives the exact opposite way that you think they should, or maybe that you believe you do, and yet you still smile, and you still speak softly, you speak gently, and you remain a friend. Kind love is when those people around you don't have to feel like they're on eggshells, that if they, heaven forbid, they make a mistake. Nothing out of malicious. They make a mistake and they're going to be nailed to a cross. That is not kind love. And we need to be seeking this kind love, this type of love. This type of love that is not a fairy tale wedding. And it's not for the faint of heart. And in fact, I don't even really feel too confident that too many of us really want to live out this kind of love. I know myself how hard this kind of love is. And I know how much extra effort it takes to do this kind of love. And we tend to live with this kind of love that says, as long as everything is going the way that I want it to, as long as you're doing everything that makes me happy, then I'm okay. Then you're okay, right? But as soon as I don't feel so good, as soon as I'm disappointed in something that you have done, whether you know it or not, as soon as you're not feeling good, as soon as I'm not feeling good, then we like to say things like, well, maybe I just don't love you like that anymore. Or maybe I don't like you. Or maybe I've fallen out of love. Or maybe I don't know how I could love. But we should establish these things and know these things about ourselves. Those things that we have to deal with if we're really going to truly know what love is. But also, there are things that love is not. There are things that love is not. This text continues. Love does not envy or boast. It is not proud or rude. So this kind of love isn't shown through superiority or competition, nor does it make people feel bad or belittled. I think it should be really, really, really hard for us to call ourselves Christians if this is the way that we would love other people. Or more to the point, this is what we wouldn't do for other people, that we would make them feel belittled. We all make mistakes, and that doesn't take away our Christian card. But it should be really hard for us to jump on our high horses if we treat people in that way. And there's more that love is not. Love is not self-seeking. Anyone feeling guilty right now? Anyone else feeling guilty? This type of love has no personal agenda for people. And what this should look like is that I'm giving my spouse exactly what she wants because she wants it, and not because I want something in return. I should be giving you exactly what you want because you want it, not because I want anything in return. And sometimes we struggle with that, don't we? Don't we? I'm going to give you this, but it's because I really want this. And I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. What if we were to say, I love you, and my love for you is not self-seeking, and I love you even if I don't get what I want? And we're going to continue with this. Love is not easily angered. Love is not easily angered. So if you and I are going to have a few drops of irritation, and we're going to let this actually roll off our backs and actually begin to love people regardless of what they're giving back. And this is hard stuff. This is hard stuff for us to do. It's hard stuff for me to do. I'm not casting stones down into the crowd. I can speak on these things because I know what it is to struggle with these things. And is anyone else here patient with so many people throughout the day? Patient to a fault. Patient that would just make God proud, right? But when you get home, your reserve of patience is exhausted. And you have nothing left for those people closest to you at home. Anyone else guilty of that? Amen. Love does not keep a list of anything. It does not keep a record of wrongs. And especially the bad things, the failures, the sins, the screw-ups. Love never says, I told you so. Love never, ever, ever, ever says, you got what you deserved. And one more of these things that we want to share that love is not. Love does not rejoice in evil. So you can't be happy when someone's sin finds him or her out. You should always be sad when sin overcomes anybody. And you know what's even sadder? When sin tears apart people's lives? I think it's sadder. It's sadder yet when those self-righteous, Pharisaic Christians who will look at that and say that I'm glad that you finally got what you deserve. Because that is not the gospel. That is not the good news. And in fact, the gospel is Jesus. And this gospel is love and forgiveness. And it's just as much for those other people that are struggling as it is for you and I. They don't deserve the gospel less than we do. We don't deserve the gospel any more than they do. The good news is that these are the things that love is. And we talked about those things that love is not. And that what love does and what love doesn't. But there are things that love always. There are things that love always. And some of you are not going to like this very much. But love always covers sin. Love always covers sin. And now we talked about these last couple verses. And 2 weeks ago, I think we talked in 1 Peter about 1 Peter 4:8. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. And in 1 Corinthians 13 says, and it says it this way: it always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and always perseveres. So love always covers sin and protects someone else's public image. This kind of love doesn't advertise frailty or failure. It doesn't point out the mistakes of other people. Rather, it always trusts God to continue the work in people's lives. It always hopes that God will get through to those people. And that they just hang in there. And this kind of love cares deeply and desires that God can include us in helping those people. Not according to our will and our preconceived notions, but according to God's purpose. And there's one more type. This kind of love, this kind that love does. There is one thing that love never. And in some ways, this one is the awesome one. In other ways, it's the hardest of them all. The text says that love never fails. Love never fails. And it's the hardest because we're all surrounded every single day with a failing love. We're surrounded every day with people that seem to not be loving us the way we'd like to. And every one of those parts, sometimes we realize it and sometimes we don't, but we are failing in that love. And then we start to feel guilty. We feel guilty about our failed love. But this love that we're talking about, this love that never fails, is not the love of yours and mine. This is God's love. This is God's love that He invites us to not only to enjoy, but to participate in. And so we're going to do that. And we're going to drive that home with this last part of the text. This last part of that text that we've been reading. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. And it's the same language as we saw at the beginning. These things that we can think are so important, they're nothing without love. And there's also this motion or this progression in the text that what was and what is and what will ultimately be, the part of the progression is our maturity. This progression is building for us to have an understanding so that we can grow in our faith. And we're not supposed to stay the same. We're supposed to continually grow. And watch what this part of the text says. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. No, now I know in part. Then I shall fully know, even as I am fully known. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. So before I read the last verse in this, and I want us to think about this. For those of us that might lack just a wee little bit in this mature love, maybe it's time for us to look at this verse and put away those childish things. Maybe it's time for us to commit into that growth. And watch this final verse. And now these three remained: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. What the Bible is saying is that when everything else passes away, these things remain: faith, hope, and love. But don't miss this. Greater than faith and hope is love. And that is the most important. And what we need to take from this is that people need to always err on the side of love. If you can't get anything right, err on the side of love. Most Christians think that it's our job to err on the side of truth. Don't we? We err on the side of truth. Grace and truth. But what the text says is that if you can only pull off one of these things, this grace and this truth, this love and this truth, if you can only pull off one of these things, it needs to be love. This is what God says. Because all of the truth means nothing if you don't have love. And I think most of us could say that love will always bring you to the truth. And we have talked about this idea of having grace and truth and that we need both. But if we go the other way and we err on the side of truth, we become ourselves Pharisees. And that's what Pharisees do. It's always about the truth. And here's the problem. We start to say, all I did was I told him the truth. I stood up for the truth. And it's all about the truth. But I hope that after this series, that you're starting to recover from that. I hope that you were actually all starting to enter in that we need like a 12-step program for this, don't we? That'll be the next series. I'll try not to make it last 12 weeks, though. But our 12-step program in recovering from this Pharisaic mindset. And I hope that this series has not only helped you, but is also helping you. And I really hope that if you took any notes, or if you've gotten any of the DVDs, or you looked online at any of the sermons, that you can go back to that for a continual growth, a continual recovery. And if any of you don't believe me, I'll throw this challenge out to the guys. If you don't believe that we should err on the side of love, get into an argument with your wives and try to tell her just a little bit of truth. Get into an argument and then follow it up with something true. And when you wake up, okay, you'll know that you need to do this differently. Because if you care about her deeply, and if she feels that love, you can say all kinds of hard and difficult things. But if you're beating her up, she's not going to listen to a bit of truth from you. And that's hard. And those things can sometimes be hard to hear. But Jesus shows us in this incarnation that God Himself came here first to put flesh on. He came first as our friend. He came first as our friend so that we could experience this love that only He could give us. And then He told us the truth. And that truth went against everything that everybody knew and practiced and thought and believed. And they heard it. Those people that allowed Him to love them, they heard it. He didn't come with just the truth. He came with love, and then people were willing and able to hear that truth. And so how are we going to do this? Taking this 8-week conversation and put it into real life. And I'm going to ask you today to possibly make 2 commitments. I'm going to ask you to consider making these 2 commitments. And some people may not be ready. And that's okay. But I want you to pray about it if you're not. And I want you to come and talk to me maybe when you are. But I'm going to ask you this first thing. The first thing I'm going to ask you today is to make a commitment to be a part of this chain reaction of the gospel. And we've said this the whole series. When the gospel does something in our lives, it shouldn't stop with us. It should continue forward and be this chain reaction. But don't miss the fact that we can be a part of that chain reaction. So I want some of you, and if God asks you to do this, to commit to whatever God does in you or for you, that you commit to sharing that and letting it come through you. And so that you can be a part of this chain reaction. And the second thing is that I'm going to ask you today to make this commitment to taking Jesus with you in these other places of your lives. And in ministry, I think that probably most pastors have had these conversations. These conversations with people that will come and they'll say, I love the way I feel when I come to church. This church stuff is really starting to grow on me. I love to be able to worship Jesus freely. But I don't know that I can take that to my workplace. Not only are there people there that don't believe or love Jesus, but I think that if they knew that I loved Jesus, they wouldn't just be upset, they would make fun of me, and I don't know that I could handle that. And I don't want you to raise your hand if you feel that way, but I know that I've had these conversations with some of our family, that they just haven't had that level of confidence. But for some of us, today is the day to make a difference and to make that commitment, to actually begin to take Jesus out there. And here's what we're going to do. All these little chains, they're not just cutesy little props. When our worship team comes up and when they start the last song, I'm going to ask those that are ready to make that commitment, to come up and take off one of those pieces of chains. There's 4 links. During the song, come up, take a chain, go back to your seat. I'm going to ask you that if you're willing to make that commitment, that those chains, whether you're a truck driver and it's up on your visor, if you work in a factory and it's hanging from your locker, if you work somewhere and you've got a booth or a station and you hang it there, let that chain be the symbol of your part in this chain reaction. And I got to tell you that I've prayed over every single one of those chains. And I prayed that they would be that power that you need To have that confidence in Jesus Christ. That confidence that would shine through you. So that you could roll your sleeves up, even if it's just in someone saying, "Wow, what's that chain for? Did your kid make that?" No, my pastor did. But he's special. But that it would give you that confidence out there in the world to start to speak boldly about the love that you have for Jesus Christ. And I got to tell you, in my heart, and I felt very convicted to do this, what I think might just happen is that I looked into the records, and in 2007, there were the most people that were in this auditorium than ever before. And it was 124. And 2 weeks ago, we were 9 away from that number. We were at 115. That 2007, 124 people was the Easter service, which we are 4 weeks away. And I think that you're going to move mountains and people's hearts. And I think that there are going to be people that are going to want to come to church with you because they see your faith. And heaven forbid, you might even ask them. And we may pack this place and show the true chain reaction of our faith. And so I'm going to ask that everyone bow their heads. Lord God, I thank you for these simple truths. I thank you for putting these steps in front of us and making them more clear. I thank you for the mountains that you've moved in so many of our lives. I thank you for using us. I thank you for being patient with us when we don't even realize you're trying to use us. And I would pray that in this moment, that this simple step would ultimately make everything better. Lord God, I'm asking you to do what only you can. Move those mountains that just happen to be shaped like our hearts. In your name we pray. Amen.